Between Ice and Stars. 1905, Antarctica. The hull of the ship moaned and groaned under the strain of its frozen enclave. HMS Stargazer and its crew had initially set out into the deep unknown to the map uncharted territories. But winter descended quickly upon them, and they found themselves trapped between stars and ice for months. Supplies were running thin, and the captain of the ship, a tall and clean-shaven gentleman by the name of Gerald Norrington, had assembled groups of hunters to venture out in search for seal meat. The most recent hunting expedition had yet to return, and Norrington was pacing anxiously up and down his headquarters. A knock on his door. His first mate, William Ward, called him. He was a gruff man with a strong jawline, harsh mutton chops and dark eyes, and a hard-boiled personality to match his rough looks. "Sir, the hunting party has returned. John Hopkins is dead. The rest are in the bridge of the ship." The two men made their way up to the bridge, where they were greeted by a shivering and mumbling hunting party. The most resolute of the group stood up and took it upon himself to report the happenings of a tragic excursion. "We spotted a seal on the other side of the big frozen lake, the one near the ship. We tracked it down, and we decided to split it in order to flank it. We managed to ambush and wound the seal, but John was nowhere to be found. We searched for him across the northern coast of the lake, and we eventually found him near the opening of the cavern." The sailor took a moment to regain his composure. It was too late. He was already stiff, clutching in his hands this damnable statue. "We did the decent thing and carried him to the ship, so he can rest under British sails. He is now in Dr. Edgar's office, getting an autopsy," William, the first mate, interjected. "All right, gentlemen, my condolences. Get some much-deserved rest now." Captain Norrington motioned to the hunting party. With that, Norrington and Ward made their way to Dr. Philip Edgar's office. The two men entered the infirmary, a claustrophobic, dairy room. The dim light from a lone candle revealed neatly shavelled flasks and vials, and a collection of leaden-bound worn books stacked upon a chairless desk in the corner of the small room. Hunched over a pull-down table was Dr. Philip Edgar, a tall and lean man with pale white skin and grey eyes. He had a solemn look on his face as he examined John Hopkins' corpse. The body of the deceased sailor had taken a hue of an otherworldly light blue, and his skin was frigid. The sailor bore the singular mark of inexorable insanity, with wide open eyes and mouth agape, his face carved into a mask of abyssal dread. Most particularly, the man was clutching in his hands a cruel statue. The idol was jet black and depicted some anthropomorphic creature in a feral position. The man's fingers were frozen in place, and removing the object risked breaking the fingers off. "So, what's the verdict?" the captain asked, as calmly as he could muster. "He died from a heart attack. Extreme shock and exertion, I imagine. No signs of ill health or struggle." The captain nodded gravely. "Put him in the storage bay, and we will bury him the first thing in the morning." That night, a hazy mist of unrest fell upon the stranded ship. The cracking of the hull, the scattering footsteps, echoing of whispers, and the death of one of their own loomed tall over the crew. Sleep did not come easy, and when it came, it was restless and riddled with nightmares of empty skies and bottomless seas. The sunless morning found HMS Stargazer and its man in bleak state, feet dragging across the floor and faces stooped low and haggardly. The crew gathered in the dining area for a miserable breakfast of a dry bread and olive paste. Then they went to their usual business of general ship upkeep. Captain Norrington watched over them as the crew pressed on, the plague of the situation weighing heavily on their sludged shoulders. They were all his responsibility, and he had vowed to return each and every one of them safe to their homes. Last night, he had to come to the cribs of the crushing realization this was a failing endeavor. With his heavy heart, he ordered 2 crew members and Dr. Edgar to go and fetch the body of John Hopkins. He was to be buried with the honor and dignity this godforsaken land allowed, in a shallow grave of snow and ice. Norrington and the remaining crew had gathered outside, waiting in sepulchral silence to put one of their own under. Minutes passed excruciatingly slow. The members of the crew were throwing sideways glances at each other, growing increasingly uneasy and emaciated. Then Dr. Edgar appeared above the deck and made his way to the gathering. With trembling feet, he moved up to the captain, leaning in and whispered something in shrill tone. The rest of the crew watched as the captain's face morphed into a grimacre of confusion. "Show me," he ordered the doctor. The 2 men left the group and made their way to the storage bay, where John's body rested. The door was open and the 2 men sat alongside Dr. Edgar, where stood at either side of the doorframe. "Sire, this is how we found it," one of them uttered. Feeble and pale, the captain entered the storage bay and was greeted by an image that shook his man. The bay was in a state of disarray. Crates were broken, shacks were cut open, barrels were flung across the room, and the floor was ridden with stray apples, potatoes, and assortments of vegetable fruits and meats. Most distressingly, John's body had vanished. After the fruitless search for the body, the crew retreated below deck as nighttime rolled in, haunted by the mystery of the missing corpse. The sailors lay sleepless to the swaying hammocks, with eyes darting around and peering into the impenetrable darkness. Dr. Edgar, in his cabin, was sitting up on his bed. The squeaking of the ship was grinding his composure to a pulp, and every time the ship sailed, his heart would jump into his throat. But worst of all was the scattering of the footsteps, echoing unnaturally outside his room, as if the crabs were skipping their way across the floor. The doctor had fixed his eye on the door, most expecting it to fly open any moment, and ghouls of the deep to storm his room. Then the footsteps abruptly stopped and the night went silent. Even the moaning of the ship had ceased. The stillness of the night was broken only by hushed voices. The doctor, bewildered by the strange whispers, slowly got up and approached the door. He placed his ear upon the wood, listened carefully. Harsh voices, speaking in alien and arcane tone, filled his ears. He stood there and felt for like hours, eavesdropping on the maddening, serpentine chants, until the whispering stopped and the footsteps drilled off in the distance. Edgar, either by devilish curiosity or divine vigor, grabbed a lantern and opened the door. The fierce darkness outside greeted him. The doctor steeled himself and lit his lantern, the light seething, flickering shadows dancing up the walls. He walked down the way he thought the figure outside his door had gone. The narrow corridors seemed to be getting narrower and narrower, and from the cabin on his left and right, Edgar heard no sound. He felt perfectly alone in his bubble of light, until the clacking of footsteps echoed on his left. Edgar went completely silent, covering his lantern as best as he could with his robe. From the corner, further down the main corridor, a faint light broke the darkness, and its center, Edgar spotted the cook, who looked at him with a sigh in relief. "You heard them too?" the cook whispered. Edgar nodded. "They went this way. Come!" The cook urged him on. The two men made their way down to the bowels of the ship, even creaked hoarsely under the trembling footsteps. The light of the lanterns illuminated the dark corridors, which seemed so close, into them further down the abyss they delved. They soldiered on, side by side, their determination to put an end to this tramping, the growing fear. When they reached the stairs leading down, they noticed a peculiar clue: snowy footsteps, puddles of water. The men looked at each other, and without uttering a word, descended further down. They were now at the storage bay, which was made up of large corridor with small rooms, once filled to the bims of supplies on either side. A low rumbling sound reverberated from the end of the corridor, an almost imperceptible mumbling. The men looked down the bay, and they could just make out a quivering candlelight escaping one tiny room. Slowly, they made their way towards it, the sounds of rhythmic chanting getting louder and louder. The door was slightly ajar, and the cook pushed it open. A dully illuminated room was the scene of an unfathomable horror. 5 sailors were huddled in a circle, raving in unpronounceable tongues. The one at the top of the circle wore a tight leather bag over his head, while the rest sported piercings of teeth across their faces. Behind them, propped up against the wall, was the corpse of John Hopkins. His skin was stretched across his face, and his hair was frozen in thick patches. His eyes were wide open, and his mouth was stuck into a toothless grin. On the floor were scattered symbols drawn in blood and candles that burned with an unholy light. In the middle of the ritualistic patterns was a small black statue of an anthropomorphic creature. The same infernal statue John Hopkins was found gripping in the rigor mortis. The mad sailors had broken off the cavaliers' fingers, which were strewn across the room, to rip the idol from his grasp. At once the sailors turned towards the 2 intruders and hissed with rabid fervor, saliva dripping on the floor. The man in the leather mask raised his arms in the air and shouted in a forbidden language. The other pack members jumped on the cook, scratching and biting in primal assault, subduing him and dragging him down. A blood-curdling scream escaped the cook's lungs. The doctor, in haste, turned and ran away, shouting for help. The captain was sitting at his desk, downing a glass of brandy, when the shrieks broke the silence of the night. He immediately grabbed a gun, sitting at the side, and strode out. There he met William Ward, his first mate. "It's coming from below the deck, sir," Ward spoke, and the 2 men ran after the sound. "Stay put, all of you," Ward shouted at the sailors, who were peeking out the corners, trying to discern what was going on. As they were reaching the stairs to the storage bay, The doctor fell on them, with eyes wide with horror. "Compose yourself, lad! What is going on?" Captain Norrington grabbed Edgar's shoulders, trying to shake him out of his daze. The doctor tried to speak, but no words came out. He could only point faintly towards the source of his terror before collapsing on the floor. The captain and his first mate stomped down the stairs, guns shining with fiery justice. The sounds of munching and crunching stopped abrupt once the two men approached the candlelit room. A soldier, his clothes ragged and torn, walked out on all fours and stared at them, his eyes bright with madness, before galloping towards them with a wild screech. The captain could only stare with a mouth agape at the monstrosity. But Ward found the courage to take the shot, which hit the sailor between the eyes. Then the first mate moved forward, followed by a still shell, shocked captain. As they got closer, 3 other men walked out, licking their lips hungrily, blood and gore spilling from their mouths. Ward shot one of them in the torso and aimed for the next one. At the same time, the bulkiest of the sailors made a run for the captain and tackled him to the ground. Norrington struggled with the beastly man, who bit and clawed at him, the stench of fresh meat emanating from his mouth. Finally, Norrington broke free and hit the sailor with the butt of his pistol, again and again, until he was hardly recognizable. At the same time, another shot echoed in the storage bay, and with a flash, the sailor fell. The 2 men composed themselves and stared at each other with disbelief, before moving to the entrance of the room where these demons had come from. There they found a half-eating, disemboweled corpse of John Hopkins, and behind it the leather-masked man on his knees clutching the black statue, reciting unearthly psalms. The man didn't even react to the intrusion, and when the bullet was shot through his skull, he fell backward in silence, his diabolical monologue reaching an abrupt ending. The statue fell down hard, making a dent on the wooden floor. The 2 men stood on top of it, silent. The small item seemed to have a strange pull on the psyche. Their minds were filled with blurry visions of cyclopean cities and fallen stars, with shadowy figures and unearthly tombs. Then an image rose above the others, with crystal clarity, that of a frozen cave, throbbing with antediluvian malice. No words was exchanged, for the man knew what they had to do. They had to return that wrenched statue to that abhorred cave. When they reached the upper desk, an eerie stillness enveloped them. They took tentative steps towards when they felt movement on their side. Ward grabbed a lantern and shone it down the corridor. A group of sailors scattered away at the shining of the light. The captain and his first mate slowly made their way across the deck. Norrington, holding the statue in his white-knuckled grip. All around them, they could feel eyes staring at them from the darkness. In the middle of the deck, the doctor, lantern at hand, was waiting for them, fidgeting and jumping at each and every moment and sound. "Sir, the man, they have gone mad," the doctor whimpered. "Come with us, lad. We are going to put an end to this foolness," the captain said sternly. The 3 men walked down the main corridor. The possessed sailors surrounded them with an oppressive darkness. Some were moving alongside them, bodies twitching and twisting. Others were speaking in raspy voices, whispering unusual incantations, while others were simply leering behind a fish-eye mask. While the group got closer to the stairs, The whole crew had gathered around them, eyes frenzied and hunger and drool dripping from their mouths. The lights seemed to keep them at bay, but they were getting more and more confident with each step. Every time a sudden movement was made, the crowds would jolt and get closer, with the captain in the lead. The man pressed on. Edgar, despite the chattering of his teeth, had managed to stay composed up until one of the sailors got out his mother's name with a grave growl. The doctor shivered and jumped with caws of ruckus in the crowd, the man wailing and shivering in anticipation. A man broke from the rest and with a feverish yelp jumped for the statue. Ward plucked him from the air and punched him violently on the nose, which exploded into a bloody mess. The first mate shot a vicious look into the crowd and swung the lantern around, forcing them to recoil back into the shadows. The three men, hastening their pace and moving swiftly up the stairs to the top deck, the crew trailing behind them. They made their way up to the bridge, and from there they left the ship. The crew, as if stunned by a spell, stopped their pursuit. Amidst the snowfall, their upmoving figures peered down at the three men. The unmoving figures peered down at the three men from atop the ship. William Ward led the group into the frozen lake towards the cave. The elements raged around them. Nature itself, bent on preventing passage, the man fought through, pushed on by unnatural and unexplainable forces. Upon reaching the entrance of the caves, exhausted and beaten by the harsh wind, the pull of their shelf had grown far too strong. Unblinking and unfazed by the immediate danger ahead, they entered. The entrance, much akin to a maw of a great beast, with stalactite teeth and jaws made by rock, swallowed them whole. The descent into the depths of hell was an arduous one, for the hostile terrain kept slashing and stabbing away at them. At times they had to move sideways into the claustrophobic corridors, or move crouched close to the ground. The silent arteries of the cavern led them further down, where they would occasionally spot a torn cloth from John's apparel, confirming that they were indeed on the right path. After a particularly narrow passage, the man stopped foot in a gigantic opening. The ceiling of the cavern was surrounded in darkness, and the light of the lanterns didn't even reach the walls of the opening. Led by the captain, the man moved towards the center of the abyss. There, an altar was revealed. Two large sarcophagi, one black and one white, sat in the middle of a perfect circle, drawn in crimson powder, an array of books and small statues, much like the one John Hopkins carried, were neatly placed at the feet of the sarcophagi. This was a tomb from out of time, with pulsated and malignant energy. The captain stepped forth and into the circle, letting the statue drop on the floor. He moved up into the black coffin and observed it closely. The resting place of whatever was within was adorned with elaborate carvings of stars, cities, and runes. What caught the captain's attention, though, were descriptions of bipedal creatures. Some were standing in fields, others above the walls of the divine place. Others were riding chariots, and others were operating machines of technology far advanced. He ran his palm over the intricately engraved lid, feeling the chiseled stone under his skin and letting the wave of eons past wash over him. His trance was broken by a loud thud, which echoed like thunder around the cavern. Norrington looked over and saw Ward, eyes wide and unblinking, looking into the open white sarcophagus, its lid resting on the side. In a fit of madness, the first mate had pushed it off. Cracking was heard from the sarcophagus. The white talon shot up and stabbed Ward in the chest, retreating back inside and letting the poor man fall on the ground. The two remaining men could only stare, drenched in dread, as a white, slim figure rose up from its resting place. The anthropomorphic, bipedal creature was standing tall above the man, its head elongated and its eyes whiter than snow. It moved crankily towards the black sarcophagus, and with a swift motion it threw the lid away, then waited. A black hand with sharp claws grabbed the edge of the sarcophagus. A beast similar to the first one, but black and bulkier, stood up. It towered over the captain, who could only stare in disbelief as the long claw struck his neck. Clean cutting flesh and skin, blood spurted out the wound, and the beast grabbed the captain from the shoulder and lifted him up to meet its gaze. Then it brought its face closer, its maw wide open. A fleshy tube emerged from the creature's mouth, approaching the newly opened incision. Then it spilled a myriad of black insectoids down the wound, which crawled under the Norrington skin and disappeared in his body. The captain's lifeless corpse was dropped to the ground. At that, the doctor started running. His heart pounded heavily against his chest. He ran through the jagged ground and the narrow passages, the hard edges tearing his clothes and skin. Pushed on by fear, most primal, he flew up the rough edges and reached the opening of the cave, his mind in shambles. He stumbled out, his knees bulking under the weight of the horror in the cavern and his eyes burning in the tapestry that unfolded. Outside, no snow was falling and no wind was blowing, as if nature herself cowered away from the dampening corner of this earth. The sky above lay bare and starless, a heavy veil of blackness of the pale ice. In his directed state, Edgar stepped on the ice and started walking aimlessly further down the maw of the nothingness. He must have been walking for ages, towards the monochromic horizon, when a crack echoed across the air and sent shockwaves down the ice. Then another cracking sound, and another, and another. When the sound merged into one crescendo of cacophony, the surface in front of Edgar exploded. When the storm of ice shards settled, a head was revealed. A perfect, symmetrical, hairless head. Much of an image of man, but distorted and corrupted. Its onyx black skin seemed to eat away all of the surrounding light, while its lidless eyes gleamed a malevolent white. With a creaking sound, its mouth opened. A murky ooze dripped out from the pits of the monstrous creation. A tendril-like appendage appeared, and its top stood a single white eye, with its black as midnight iris darting around maniacally. Suddenly, the interferal eye locked its gaze with Edgar, boring into his very soul, like a cyclopean drill. A wave of primal dread washed over the doctor's body, relegating him to a vermin cowering under the apex predator. He tried to run, but his shattered nerves failed him. He collapsed on his back, his eyes glued to the third eye of his unholy giant, staring down at him. Then it turned away from him, uninterested, and rose towards the sky. Edgar's sanity slipped away in an instant, as if a grip on his mind had been loosened, and his thoughts had spilled out of a heap of incoherent drivel. His eyes trailed upwards, where they got lost into an infinite darkness of sky, just before the overwhelming trinity of black was broken by a streak of red, followed by another, and another, and another. Wombs of crimson opened on the sky above, fireballs spiraling towards the wrenched earth below. He was calling them down, his children, his outcast angels. He was calling them all down. When Edgar regained his senses, he was in the middle of a glacial lake, snow falling heavily around him and the stars shining brightly from above. He tried to get up, but he slipped back down. "Here, grab my hands!" Captain Norrington shouted through the wind. "No!" Edgar shouted as he stumbled to his feet. "It cannot be!" He whispered, strands of insanity beginning to slither in his mind. He stood bewildered in the front of his once dead captain, and that is when he saw them, the captain's eyes. They were blank and grey, all the color drained from his irises. Then, with a blink, they went back to normal, on the brink of madness. Dr. Philip Edgar ran into the snowstorm, his screams echoing in the frozen enchambment of hell until the eternal night claimed him.